remote patient management platform for pediatric patients with complex cardiorespiratory conditions. We'll discuss the clinical need, the market opportunity, and the commercialization strategy for this technology, as well as its potential to improve outcomes for both patients and providers. To begin, our project focuses on a critical gap in pediatric cardiac care. So infants with complex congenital heart disease experience a high risk interstage period after surgery, where mortality is around 5 to 10%. And the current monitoring system and programs rely heavily on caregivers manually entering and collecting data, resulting in data missing and errors around 38%. And this often leaves clinicians with incomplete information and limits their ability to identify clinical deteriorations early. So our project objective is to evaluate whether a continuous remote monitoring platform could improve visibility into patient health while also reducing caregiver burden and support better clinical decision making. Our proposed solution is a wireless medical grade remote monitoring platform designed specifically for the pediatric cardiac patients. So in one sentence, we would say that we would want to help hospital detect deteriorations earlier by basically potentially replacing their manual pediatric monitoring with continuous EHR integrated remote patient monitoring. And today, clinicians often rely on a caregiver-reported measurements collected only a few times a day, creating gaps in visibility between their check-ins. And our platform hopefully addresses this challenge by continuously capturing the physiological data, automatically recording the vital signs, and delivering a more complex picture of the patient's health over time. And the system is also designed to fit into the existing clinical workflow while minimizing the burden on caregivers and families. And rather than requiring repeated manual entry, and monitoring occurs passively in the background, allowing caregivers to actually focus on other needs for the children. And ultimately, the value proposition is simple. It's going to be a continuous monitoring provides digestible, actionable data that can support earlier detection of deterioration, enable faster clinical intervention, and ultimately improve patient outcomes. Beyond the clinical need, our research identified significant challenges for every stakeholder involved in pediatric home monitoring systems. For clinicians, one of the biggest frustration is that the monitoring data often exits out of their normal workflow. So many current solutions requires them to have separate logins and manual review, making it difficult to quickly identify which patient needs the attention. And what clinicians really want is an actionable information delivered directly within the system they already use. For caregivers, monitoring can become a daily burden sometimes, and parents are often responsible for collecting and reporting measurements multiple times a day, which creates additional stress during an already challenging period. Stakeholders consistently emphasize the value of passive monitoring that reduces effort while providing greater peace of mind as well. On the other hand, the hospital faces a different challenge. Any new technology must not only improve patient outcomes, but also demonstrate financial value through reduced readmissions, early discharge opportunities, and a clear return on investments. Together, these stakeholders need highlight why there is a strong demand for a more integrated and scalable monitoring solution. So to evaluate our commercial viability, we analyze the market opportunity across several levels, moving from a broader pediatric healthcare landscape to a specific segment our solution targets. At the broadest level, we have the global pediatric healthcare market, which represents a total addressable market size of approximately $170 billion as of 2024. This demonstrates the overall scale of pediatric healthcare spending and highlights the growing demand of technologies that improve care, delivery, and patient outcomes. Within the market, wearable medical device and remote patient monitoring represents one of the fastest growing market. This market is projected to grow to around $150 billion by 2029, which reflects an increasing adoption of digital health technologies and expansion of remote care models, which shows the demand of how continuous monitoring might increase. And as we narrow our focus further, the cardiac diagnostic devices represent a market worth $26 billion as of 2025. And this is particularly relevant because cardiovascular monitoring remains one of the most established and clinically valuable applications of remote patient monitoring. And finally, the infant heart monitoring market represents an initial target space and is projected to grow approximately from 1.3 billion to 3.1 billion by 2036. While smaller than the broader markets, this segment is especially attractive because it combines a strong growth within a significant unmet clinical need. What makes this opportunity particularly compelling is that no current solution fully addresses the needs of a high-risk pediatric cardiac patients, and combined with the increasing adoption of remote monitoring technologies and relatively limited direct competition, these trends suggest a strong opportunity for both clinical impact and a long-term commercial growth. While the overall market opportunity is large, we focused our beachhead market strategy rather than attempting to serve multiple markets simultaneously. So our initial target population is infants with single ventricle heart disease or SVHD. Although this represents only around 1,000 births per year annually in the United States, it is one of the highest risk and most underserved pediatric cardiac population. These patients require intensive monitoring during their interstage period, and yet no existing product is specifically designed and validated for this use case. Beyond the unmet need, single ventricle heart disease also represents a strategic entry point, and by demonstrating clinical utility in one of the most complex pediatric population, the platform can establish a clinical credibility and generate outcome data and overcome some of the most demanding validation and regulatory requirements. And once established in that market, the platform can expand into its larger adjacent market. These include the NICU early discharge, the PICU early discharge, and pediatric hospital at-home care. Each of these settings is experiencing growing interest in remote monitoring, as healthcare systems look to reduce inpatient stays while maintaining patient safety. And importantly, these markets all share a common challenge that clinicians need continuous physiological data after patients leave the hospital. And because the core monitoring requirements remain similar, the same device architecture could potentially be adapted across these settings without fundamental redesigning. Overall, this creates a scalable growth pathway from a highly specialized, high-need patient population to a much larger pediatric monitoring market, and allowing the platform to expand its clinical impact while building a sustainable long-term business opportunity.
So moving to our business hypothesis, we have four main hypotheses about how this business will work, and in testing each one through our research and interviews. The first is about clinical adoption. So we believe clinicians will use the device if a predictive algorithm filters the continuous data before they see it. Because we spoke to a clinician and then they said that continuous data might lead to might cause them to have extra work since it's a lot of information. So the predictive algorithm is needed in order for them to have a digestible data. So EHR integration alone is not enough. The second is about caregiver compliances. So currently, manual entry will lead to 38% of missing data because the system is asking too much parents who are already stressed. So we believe this passive device can remove this burden. And then third is on the payer side, we believe the Medicaid will reimburse this device if we can show it can reduce the expensive intervention and emergency readmission. And there's a reimbursement pathway through the RVN billing codes. And finally, we see the market scalability. So the same monitoring gap found in single ventricular heart disease infant also exists in NICU and PICU population, and the same device design can serve all of them without major changes. So we look into our competitors. While Owlet and Hinlab operate in the same space, they are not necessarily our direct competitors at this stage because neither of them have been clinical validated for a single ventricular heart disease patient, which is our specific beachhead market. But we thought that it's still useful to understand where we stand relative to the broader market. So at the first glance, all three devices provide continuous passive monitoring. However, there are three main differences. The first is considered the target use. Both competitors are made for general pediatric patient, while our device is specifically designed and clinically validated for infant, with single ventricle heart disease. And the second is about predictive capability. Outlet doesn't have any, Handout has its own, but it's not trained on single ventricle heart disease data. We're developing our device specifically for this population, but it's still in earlier stage with ongoing clinical trials. And the third, consider the parameters. Outlet only mentioned SpO2. Our device measures ECG, PPG, and SpO2 simultaneously, which can give clinicians a much more complete pictures. And we're still working on FDA clearance and EHR integration. However, we are the only company running a clinical trial in this population. And currently, Lurie Hospital and other institutions are using like Locus Health and similar platform for program integration. But our goal is to integrate data directly into clinicians' existing Epic workflow so they don't have to switch platform between those. So this is our solution. A wireless continuous medical grade wearable designed specifically for an infant and built for clinical actions. So the device is a pillar side sensor system consisting of 3 modular units, which is a chest ECG, a head PPG, and a peripheral unit that can be placed on the lymph, neck, or the abdomen. Together, they continuously detect oxygen, blood pressure, heart rate, pulse, and internal body sounds. And for design feature, first is entirely passive. So once it's placed on the infant, caregiver doesn't need to manually enter any data or trigger any measurement. The device can capture everything automatically. Second, all 3 units can charge through a shared magnetic charger, so there's no any compatibility issues, and they can be charged while doing the monitoring. And for family concerned about safety, the sensor can be mounted on a larger pad to address choking issue. And for battery life, it can range from 10 to 18 hours, depends on the unit. It's still in clinical trial right now, so currently they're manually documented and calculated those data, and EHR integration and the predictive algorithm are future milestone, but the hardware itself currently is working and the data is being captured. And shift to value proposition. For caregiver, the device is small and passive. So the child can move freely, meaning no cables, which can increase parent and child bonding. And the only thing is like the electrical pad needs to be replaced. So the goal is to remove those like burden on an already stressed family. And for the clinician, the device continues to detect those parameters, which give them a bigger and a complete picture of what's the infant's condition. And as for phase 2 development, a predictive algorithm will filter out those data and only actionable alert will go into the Epic. And the dense data we're collecting right now is through the clinical trial is to train those like algorithms. And for hospital, early safe discharge translated to 8K to 15K saving per patient. And this device also support the RBM billing and reduce unnecessary ED visit. So looking at the big picture, for patient, it means early detection, safe care at home, and better outcomes. And for hospital, it means fewer readmission, early discharge, and lower costs. So the differentiation between our product and the other is that no other platform provides continuous wireless monitoring that is validated specifically for single ventricle heart disease, along with predictive algorithm and direct EHR integration, all is designed specifically for infants.
So during our interviews, we identified 4 structural gaps in current pediatric monitoring. Each one is an opportunity that our design either fill or can potentially design to fit. First one is clinical data quality. Pulse oximetry is validated at 90 to 100% saturation, while single ventricle patients live at 75 to 85%. So because there is a shift in the baseline, this is where accuracy degrades. And skin tone bias also compounds this. Clinician can reliably distinguish normal fluctuation from real deterioration. Therefore, it creates an opportunity for a cyanotic validated skin tone tested sensor as a structural differentiation. And second is operational burden. Nurses spend 10 to 30 minutes per spot check troubleshooting unreliable readings during remote monitoring, which is an invisible layer of labor across 15 to 20 patients per program daily. Reliable continuous data reclaims the full-time equivalent full-time equivalent working hours. And third is adoption friction. Hospitals trust the research, but can sometimes resist new platforms, which are gated by IT costs, cybersecurity, and integration burden, depending on the geolocation and institution policies, and non-clinical merit. Our model that we'll cover in later slides will address that with vendor managed life cycle and Epic pre-authorized integration and DME rental channel hospitals already used. And the last one is pediatric design gap. Wearables are built for adults. Pediatric needs around form factor, motion tolerance, and safety group still remains underserved. So our purpose-built infant design with sensor mass safety closes that gap. And for the business model, we are proposing a hospital pay subscription on a per patient month basis, employed through the hospital existing department, a durable medical equipment check. The setting matters because the hospital is the customer and home is deployment site anchored to the 120-day interstage episode. We're not pitching a consumer wearable because our interviews made it clear that direct-to-consumer falls for Medicaid-heavy pediatric populations. And for the pricing benchmark, we're thinking roughly around $150 per patient per month, matching the hospital RPM and DME rental rates nursing team cited. And that would be around $600 per interstage episode. The compelling part of the bundle is the vendor managed service wrap. Inventory, sanitization, and replacements are all handled by manufacturers instead of the hospital, and we handle the full device lifecycle. The medical information office at Lurie explicitly flagged that as a procurement incentive. The hospital will recover costs through safety codes plus the nursing type savings. And the rationale for this model is that direct to customer model will fail for Medicaid heavy pediatrics, and pure RBM billing alone is insufficient. So equal weight multi-channel revenue has been their primary model. The hospital subscription with vendor managed service is what every stakeholder is pointing towards. And for phase 2 expansion, we can consider bundle per episode pricing tied to share saving contracts once the predicted algorithm matures and outcome data is in hand. For our unit economics, the main takeaway is that scale is the problem. Like scale will solve our problem. So we modeled our costs at 3 tiers. One is at academic, which is 100 units. The fully loaded cost of service is around 16,000 per unit, and grant funded by definition, so no MSRP can cover that. At clinical, the cost will start to drop, and then finally at a scale of 50,000 units, we can finally reach a reasonable cost. And there are 3 insights that we should take away from this unit cost analysis. One is that disposable drive recurring revenue. At scale, $22 of 47.5 bill of material is adhesive consumed over the interstage episode. So reusable device plus recurring consumables is subscription aligned by design. Second is that if we can partner with Cyber as manufacturer, it means that we can apply a transfer price multiplier. So that partnership will also affect the cost structure significantly. And third, and most importantly, is that the 1.5 million one-time regulatory cost is also something that we need to address in future commercialization path. For our forma, this is estimated as a conservative scenario. You can see that because SBHD is essentially a niche market, and the regulatory cost of this device being a breakthrough medical device, the cost will be significant as compared to patient volume. So we will not be able to profit until after year 5. And one of the hidden costs that is worth flagging is that wireless infrastructure that is needed for this device to be deployed. Every new hospital site needs Wi-Fi or cellular booster and EHR or locus integration and staff training, and that's a major cost that needs to come with the service of this device. Therefore, in order to profit, we have to consider expanding into other markets. So that is our main pivot. First, we need to accelerate expansion as soon as possible, which means bringing NICU and hospital at home revenue forward earlier, and to shift the value-based pricing, which captures a share of 200,000 per program in nursing time savings. Third, plan for sustained grant runway through years 1 to 3, and finally, charging premium for vendor managed service level. And if we consider that path, we might be able to profit or recover the cost earlier than if we focus on SBHD alone. Yeah, thank you.
All right, any questions? I guess, Carolyn, you're out there.
Yeah, I'm here. I just want to compliment the team. I don't know if you saw me nodding along, but a lot of this made a lot of sense and it's really exciting. And I'm impressed with the detail, especially in such a short period of time. And I know they had to work hard to get some of those interviews with our clinical team. I particularly like some of the nuggets about cost saving times for the clinicians. That efficiency is of great interest to the hospital now. And I thought it was really interesting to see the idea of pricing per patient under the hospital. That seems to me also to be quite feasible. And I think this finding here about volume is very real, and in line with some of the hypotheses I had, but it's really nice to see what it actually looks like played out, right? There's one thing for me to anticipate that, it's another for you to have done the work to prove it. So this is fantastic. And I think gives us a lot of idea about how we would potentially be positioning it. I'm curious what John thinks too as well, because we're working on the project together.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the better presentations that I think I've ever heard, in the context of this class. It's just fantastic. You guys did a great job. So I had a few questions, like, in terms of the wireless infrastructure and other things, what do you guys have any opinion about whether you partner early with a Medtronic or a Boston Scientific or a Draeger or some large established medical device company that leverage all of their internal expertise to address some hidden costs, for example, just as a business model going forward?
I guess potentially, but I think that's something we could possibly if next steps, if someone takes us forward, would be to maybe talk to them and see how they can help in terms of the cost, see how they can help cut down these costs or where they can pitch in, because I feel like we haven't explored it in that sense. So I don't have much to say about it, but I guess that would maybe help in the cost in terms of that, and I guess that could be potential next steps.
Yeah, and I guess a related question: when you look at the two competitors, the Owlet and the other one, do we have any sales volumes for them? And do you know if they've been adopted by hospitals? I think they have not pursued a partnership relationship, right? They're sort of
No.
I
Yes.
can speak to that too after the students go, if you don't happen to know the answers.
Actually, during our interview, the Lurie nursing team mentioned that Massimo is actually a more reliable partner if they were considered.
as a large company partner.
Yes, that's right, because they are FDA approved.
Yeah.
and they have like similar products that are pretty reliable.
Yeah, Vivian's point is a good one. I think especially the groups that take care of really medically fragile kids want to see the data. And the Massimo team, if you look on their website, they like to point out that they were the pulse oxes that were used in the pivotal trials to identify if complex congenital heart disease should be part of screening. And they really point to that. And I think almost in their messaging conflate that with FDA approval, if you will, which is really different than what they were doing, which is right, demonstrating that their product is good enough that it can pick up really complex needs. But I think your point, John, is that the other two competitors right now are primarily through direct to consumer, especially Alep. They do have a prescription version, but the pediatricians kind of hate what they use it for, right? Which is to help with parents who are worried about SIDS. The Gabby, they're primarily selling it right now for sleep monitoring, as an adjunct or as a replacement for a sleep study. I am not aware of them trying to use it in this more complex population. It would be more of the Massimo group trying to make competing against them, but they seem to be uninterested in RPM right now. So I do think the assessment that was put here is a good one. That it's really about being medical grade for a population where the people who are buying it, which is the hospital, want to have high levels of confidence in the reading.
Nice. Yeah. No, great job. Amazing.
Yeah, and that's a great job. I would also add the question about the overhead. I think this is why I just want to make a pitch. Like, this is why when developing the technology, which is what the QI teams is doing, where when we build it with the health systems in mind, then that 50,000 K is going to be lower than it would be because you'll have planned for a lot of the implementation in the design itself. And so hopefully that upgrade cost would be less every time we build with the health systems in mind. So
yeah, I guess in the context of the specific health system, is that transferable to others, or is everything sort of customized?
I think that no matter what, you'll have to do the staff training. You will have to customize to some degree, but at least if you know whether you're customizing to Epic or not, that will really help. I think most places now have Wi-Fi cellular boosting. You're right, there will always be some level of customizing for health systems, but it's like to what degree? There are many commonalities, at least if you're using Epic or Cerner. So I think that they can be reduced, but they're not going to be eliminated, to your point. They're definitely going to still be there. I just want to emphasize this was really well done, and I would love to see the slides so I can read them in more detail later because this was so much great work.
Yeah, I'll make sure you get them. I'm sure the team will make sure you get them. The 50K that you have for wireless infrastructure setup, if you prioritize hospitals that already have the wireless infrastructure, which I suspect in this day and age is the vast majority of them, I would assume that could then save you almost, in year one, almost $1 million, because that's 20, right? Isn't that 20 sites? Is that how I read that, or 20 patients?
Yes, I think.
Because I think it's a little bit confusing here. You've got site-related costs and patient-related revenues that are kind of mixed on the same slide. But I guess bottom line is you're going to save a lot of money if you don't have to set up the wireless stuff yourselves, right? And if you don't have to contract that out, I mean, that's a huge savings. Licensing costs you showed, those are not part of your unit economics, right? Licensing?
I don't think so.
Okay, because I think that would be probably a one-time charge, right? That's not part of your unit economics. RPM billing codes. Do you know if this technology will be compatible with the billing codes?
Actually, it does. When we interviewed with the finance team, they say that it meets the codes because monitoring is. I'm sorry, I forgot the definition, but they say that it is billable, but there isn't an incentive to reimburse because existing devices already meet the requirements for monitoring.
So there is an incentive to reimburse, or there isn't?
There isn't.
There isn't.
Yeah, because it's not that essential. Like the improvement has to be a lot more than existing center of care.
I see.
In order for them to have a better incentive.
So,
I agree with Vivian, in part because the codes are such a low reimbursement. It's not what motivates the hospitals. She's right.
So it's not really a big factor then, I guess. Right, okay. All right, well, those are the questions I had. Anything else?
Thank you, Carolyn, for being such a great client.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully you found value in it. Thank you to the team. Nice job. Well done. All right, we're just in time to set up for breast milk. So breast milk, if you can come on up. Make sure you guys stop sharing.
One of our group members are missing because of that.
Understood.
Just having a surgery.
Okay, I think we understand. Make sure you allocate about at least 5 or 7 minutes for Q&A.
Yeah. How many do you have?
Well, 30 minus 7, so let's say 23.
Okay, that's good.
I guess while we're waiting, Hayes, any comments? What did you think of what you saw?
Super impressive. I've been to a few of these over the years and a few in the last few days, and this really ranks up as up there with something that's both a super impressive presentation, and I trust Carolyn and John when they say that the content is impressive as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, part of it is use the Orbit AI tool to get started so they have
Great.
a running start, right? So 10 weeks,
fantastic.
like 12 or 13. Right? You guys okay up there? Do you need help? There you go. Now you got it. Okay. All right, breastfeeding team, take it away.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So we are the consulting team for Entrepreneurship 425. I'm Marcus. Unfortunately, Julia is not with us. We have Xiaoru and Yishen. And over the past 10 weeks, we evaluated product market fit and go-to-market strategy for a wearable breastfeeding monitoring device. We'll walk you through the problem, the market, what we found in our research, our solution recommendation, the business model, the financials, and lastly, the risks. So let's get into it. So we have 10 sections today. We start with the problem and market to establish why this opportunity exists. We move through our research findings and competitive landscape as the evidence layer, then land on the solution, the business model, unit economics, financials, and risks. We'll close with the team and then have questions at the end. So the problem, 85.7% of US mothers start breastfeeding at birth. This is nearly universal. However, nearly 60% stop earlier than they planned, and 52% of those say the reason was not having enough milk. Here's the thing. Clinical evidence shows that in most of these cases, supply was actually fine. The problem is not psychological. It is information. Physiological. It is informational. During direct breastfeeding, milk transfer is completely invisible. You cannot see ounces and you cannot count millimeters. Every mother we interviewed rated the anxiety of not knowing as a 7 or above out of 10 in daily mental load. This is the gap that we are simply solving. So now to transition into our market opportunity. 3.6 million US births occur every year. 83% of that initiate breastfeeding. Roughly 3 million mothers annually. The TAM is 748 million. We narrow to a SAM of 233 million, which represents the 933,000 mothers per year who explicitly report supply anxiety, our core customer. Year one SOM is 12 million at 5% captured through DTC and IVCLC pilots. By year 3, post-validation and at Amazon scale, we project that $35 million at 50% capture. These are conservative numbers, however, benchmarks below comparable wearable health launches like our competitor, HoloLens. I mean, not our competitor, our benchmark. I'm sorry. So next we transition to our competitive landscape. The competitive landscape is quite thin at the top. The only direct competitor we've seen is Enfant, which placed at a $299 premium price, and the accuracy is unclear. The other closest direct competitors are Coraflow and Milkmaid, and these are either pre-commercial or unavailable in the US. The rest solve adjacent problems such as pumping, infant vitals, episodic weighing, but none provide real-time direct breastfeeding milk transfer data via a comparable wearable device. That gap is our entire value proposition. Our opportunity is to establish ourselves before the market matures. We now have our research and evidence completed. We completed 15 of a target 25 to 30 interviews, postpartum mothers and clinical professionals. We found 4 findings, however. One is the problem is real and emotionally significant across every interview, and that has no exceptions. The second finding is that every existing tool fails on the actual question mothers are asking of, did my baby actually get enough milk? The third finding is the usability is a binary gate. We set up over 60, the setup over 60-second kills adoption of actually wanting to put on the device. The fourth finding, and this is the biggest one, is that mothers anchor on $75 to $100 as a immediate buy price. So at $75 to $100, all of our interviewees said that they would immediately buy the price. Our original hypothesis was originally $200 to $300 compared to kind of the other devices that were selling at the time, but that was wrong, and it has direct implications for our business model, which we will now address.
So having established the problem and confirmed that no direct competitor is currently shipping to US consumers, we want to present that what we're building, and more importantly, why we designed it the way we did. So across our customer interviews, one finding came up repeatedly. Mothers do not want more data. They want one answer. Did my baby get enough? That single question is the foundation of the entire product. Our solution is a wearable Sacred-style patch sensor worn on the breast during the feed. It uses bioimpedance sensing, the same measurement principle used in clinical milk transfer assessments, to estimate how much milk the baby consumed in real time. At the end of each feed, the comparison app delivers one output. Your baby likely had enough. The app is free. There will be no subscription. So the product is built around 4 principles. First, it is direct. We measure actual milk transfer, not proxies like feed duration, baby weight on a scale, or sound. Second, it is discrete. The patch takes under 60 seconds to apply and does not disrupt the feeding. Third, it is reassuring. The output is a calm post-feed summary, not a live dashboard. Our interviewees show that real-time monitoring during the feed actually increases anxiety rather than reducing it. And fourth, it is credible. The device is designed to be recommendable by IBCLCs with the clinical validation pathway against weight feed measurement. So the guiding UX principle is this. We want to build a mother's confidence until she no longer needs the device. This is a reassurance tool, not a tracking dependency. So for the business model. So our business model is very straightforward. Hardware only at a $100 MSRP with a free companion. We generate revenue once at the point of device set. So we sell through 3 channels, and before walking through each one, it is worth explaining where the numbers come from. We benchmark our assumptions against 3 comparable companies in the market. Owlet, the publicly traded infant health wearable company that sells the Dream Sock at $299, provided the most detailed public financials. Their SEC filings gave us growth margin benchmarks, marketing expense ratios, and real tariff impacting. Mom Cozy, the #1 global wearable breast pump, ran at $90 to $199, provided the channel strategy benchmark. They build market leaderships almost entirely through Amazon. And Infant, our closest direct competitor, as a wearable breastfeeding sensor at $290, validating both the clinical channel opportunity and the pricing gap we are entering. So Amazon FBA is our primary channel following the Mom Cozy playbook. Amazon is where we expect the highest volume at the lowest acquisition cost. Net revenue per unit is $92. That reflects an 8% referral fee, which is the correct rate for the consumer electronic category on Amazon. Offered through Amazon Seller Central's 2026 fee schedule. Customer acquisition cost is $15, equivalent to a 15% advertising cost of sale, consistent with the 2026 Amazon benchmarks for health and electronics. So this is our most efficient channel. The IBCLC clinic channel is a clinical seating, not a margin channel, at a $74 wholesale price and a year one COGs of $81. This channel sells below hardware cost. We are treating it as a marketing investment. So D2C is our own website and brand building. At $97 net revenue and $145 customer acquisition cost in year one. This channel runs a significant loss. We maintain it at a controlled budget to own the customer relationship, support FSA and HSA purchasing, and tell the brand story directly. It is not where we expect volume. So the GTM sequence reflects this. Year one is a D2C launch with 2 IBCLC pilot clinics. Year 2 is Amazon scale-up at national IBCLC network expansion. Year 3 targets hospital partnerships and the initial FDA clearance. So the device sells at $100. That price was set by our own customer research. Below $100 triggers immediate purchase intent. $100 to $150 creates hesitation. Above $250 is broadly rejected. $100 is the price that maximizes adoption. Fully landed COGs in year one is $81 per unit. That includes bill materials, contract manufacturing, packaging, and inbound logistics. The most significant revision from our early model is the import duty, which we increased from 7% to 22%. That change is based on current US-China tariff data, Section 301 tariff 25% plus a 10% IEEPA tariff, partially offset by assumed Vietnam and Thailand sourcing of certain components. So outlet cited tariff at a 280 basis point gross margin, dragging their Q3 2025 earnings with. So by year 3, at over 100,000 units, COGs compressed to $41, a 49% reduction driven by volume pricing and manufacturing scale. Looking at the channel table, so D2C has a $97 net revenue, $81 COGs, and 145 CAC. Year one contribution is negative 157. And so which means for every $100 device we sell through D2C, you have to spend $257 for the negative margin. So Amazon has a 92 net revenue, reflect the corrected 8% referral fee, $81 COGs, and only $15 in customer acquisition cost. Year one contribution is negative 28, and that is the number we're actively managing. By year 3, when COGs has fallen to 41, and organic rank has reduced ad dependency, Amazon contribution reaches positive 25 per unit. IBCLC, $74 net revenue against $81 COGs, negative 52 contribution in year one. As discussed, this is a clinical marketing spend, not a revenue channel, at least at this price point. So the blended picture is negative $108 per unit in year one across 10,000 units, a contribution loss of approximately $1.1 million. By year 3, blended contribution turns positive at $4 per unit on 130,000 units, approximately $485,000 in contribution profit. That is the inflection point. Amazon reaches $25 positive, IBCLC reaches $12 positive, and COGs falls below the wholesale price. The model works if we sequence correctly. Amazon first, IBCLC as clinical seating, D2C at a control spend. That is the Mom Cozy and outlet playbook applied to our price plan and cut.
Yeah, it projects a path from a year one loss of 1.1 million to a year 3 of gaining 17.3 million, a 94% margin. Again, this is estimation based on example companies. Revenue grows from 12 million to 35 million, driven by unit volume, 47K to 140K, and COGS compression. The year one loss is deliverable. It funds R&D, clinical validation, and IBCLC partnerships build out that de-risks year 2 and 3. Gross margins are healthy across all years because the hardware carries from say margin once CAC is excluded. The largest cost driver in year 1, 2 is sales and marketing, which shifts from expensive DTC advertising toward lower CAC clinic referral channels over time. And these figures are directional. Final unit volumes depend on pricing, validation, and clinical trial outcomes. Next slide. So we track 6 primary risks. The 2 highest risks are pricing mismatch and usability failure. The pricing is the most open question from our interviews. Mothers consistently showed 50 to 60% below our original hypothesis of around $250, which affects their revenue model. Also, some insights from the interview is that if the device takes more than 2 minutes to 5 minutes to set up, adoption willingness decreases. This drives our product design priority above all else. And anxiety amplification is a subtler risk that UX design must address. The raw interface could worsen the very problem we're solving. And then we have good market strategy. Our interviews showed that the problem is strongest among first-time mothers. Those mothers often seek reassurance from professionals because they're unsure whether their baby is getting enough milk. Several interviewees specifically mentioned that recommendation from lactation consultants, pediatricians, or hospitals would significantly increase their trust in the product. This suggests that the healthcare provider should be our initial distribution channel rather than a pure direct-to-customer launch. So launch through healthcare partners first, and then expand to D2C and Amazon after validation and trust have been established. Next slide. So this roadmap reflects what we learned from our interviews and market research. In phase 1, the focus is on validation and trust building through pilot programs with hospitals, lactation consultants, and breastfeeding clinics. Success will be measured by clinical partnerships, pilot participation, and additional customer validation. In phase 2, the company can expand to direct-to-customer sales, Amazon and influencer-driven marketing after establishing credibility and collecting testimonials. Success metrics include customer acquisition, online reviews, and sales growth. In phase 3, the focus shifts to scaling through a broader healthcare partnership, employer maternity programs, and potential reimbursement opportunities. Success will be measured by market penetration, partnerships, growth, and sustainability expansion. Our pricing recommendation is at a launch price of approximately $99. Interviews finding consistently suggested willingness to pay between $40 to $150, while prices above $250 were often viewed as too expensive. So a 99 price point provides a balance between affordability for the mothers and commercial viability for the business. And it is more important to note that these recommendations are based on a limited sample of interviews conducted during the course of this project, and therefore it should be considered directional rather than exclusive.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Felicia, any comments?
No, great job. I think first shout out honestly is finding those interviews. I think finding 15 people in this population is not easy. So kudos to you guys. I thought it was really insightful what you guys figured out with the interviews, especially in terms of finding the balance between just like seeing pure data and assuming that everyone just wants more data these days versus, getting some output that'll actually give reassurance. So the differentiation between real-time monitoring and just knowing, did baby get enough? I think it was really good. Thought your risk assessment was really spot on. So that was really helpful, between pricing, usability, and then the anxiety amplification. I had a few questions on a little bit of the D2C. I think the first is because you guys reference Amazon a lot. And so just kind of curious what you guys see as the pros and cons of Amazon from a distributor perspective and whether or not you looked at other retailers, for example, like, CVS or, Walmart, who's trying to make a health play now. Did you kind of look at other retailers and any thoughts on that?
So the reason why we chose Amazon is because it is the most so you spend how do I put it? You don't spend as much as to sell it compared to other retails. So like the that's why like you get because you're already losing money on the D2C for the first couple of years. So it is very important to find a channel that makes profit as quick as possible. That's why I think we think Amazon is the most fitted for this specific product. But you can always consider other channels afterwards, like after you manage it the first few years. Yeah, you can open more, I think, channels rather than. But now I think Amazon is the most easiest to get your hands on compared to others.
That makes sense. And then the other one was around the order, which I love that you guys put a lot of thought into that in terms of do you go like B2B to C essentially? Like, do you go to the IBCLCs first, the lactation consultants who will then, sort of pitch the product to their patients? How do you balance first going D2C, where these days there's a lot of people who say, oh, I'm going to go direct to consumer until everyone is basically telling their doctor about it or their lactation consultant about it. Like, hey, I use this thing. Like, that's kind of how Owlet happened. Everyone went to their pediatrician and was like, hey, I'm using this thing called Owlet. Response is, a little mixed, but how do you sort of balance that approach or the reverse in which you guys are suggesting, which is try to get buy-in from the providers first, which naturally can be a skeptical group, and then have them pitch it to their patients?
That's
Yeah, I think one thing appears a lot in the interview is they want credibility from professionals, especially for the first time mothers. And it's kind of why we focus on that at first. But I think directly D2C gonna work as well. But you're gonna lose that sense of credibility from your professionals. Does that answer the question?
well, I think D2C is also important, but because during our interview, a lot of mothers also raised the concerns of safety, like if there's any radiations or not, like is it harmful to the babies? So I think it's important to make the mom believe that this product is entirely safe for both the mother and the baby.
And accurate too, because if
Yeah,
it's not
yeah, and
accurate,
it has to be accurate. It has to be able to tell the mom, like make the mom believe that whatever it's telling her, it's real. Like the baby is having enough milk and whatever. So that's why.
Yeah, that makes sense. Curious, John, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a good job. I mean, kind of build on Felicia's comments. I thought the feedback that you received around what the mothers want to see from the device and simpler is better. It's kind of an interesting, really powerful finding. My baby had enough milk and that's it. But I guess you probably also want to have quantitative information, right? If the mother is working with a lactation consultant or something like that, the physician might want to see the actual numbers. So I guess the idea is that the device would be capturing that information, but not necessarily presenting it to the mother on a regular basis to avoid stress inducing information.
Yeah, so I think for not first time moms, like moms who have multiple children, like they have already experienced the first breastfeeding.
Yeah.
They know what they are expecting. That's when they say they want to see the numbers. But for most like first who have like just finished their first breastfeeding experience, they were like, just tell me if it's enough. That would be
Like a green light, red light type of thing.
Kind of option on the app or something.
Well, I
like
think-
that. You see,
I think it's like you can just tell them the number at the end and then see if it's enough. You don't have to show the process.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
So do
I
you
thought that
mean-
was. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, so do you mean basically they don't want to see the real time number like per second, but they may
No.
want to see the like before after so that they can then
Or like
No.
a conclusion
Yeah,
rather than like tracking the whole.
yeah,
I don't think they have enough attention to see the real time
yeah,
eating.
yeah. That makes sense. And then I guess my other question was around the pricing. So you had like 50 to 100 would be immediate purchase, right? 100 to 150 would be, they would consider it. And then 250 and above, unlikely or something like that, right?
Yes.
And I guess the question is, because a lot of your economic models are going to critically hinge on that price point, why don't you start high? At the very highest end of what you think would be acceptable?
Well, we
Why
have-
go to 100?
We have another version of this, which we set the price to
Just
$2.99.
Or
Yeah,
2%.
That's actually our midterm presentation. We use that thing.
Yeah, but you backed off of it for some reason. And I guess my thought is, in the early, you're never going to be able to increase the price, right? So whatever you start with, you're just coming down relative to that. And if you start at 99, that doesn't give you much cushion, to
Yeah.
move the price down and still maintain profitability. The other,
Me personally, I would say the sweet spot is around 200, so like 199.
yeah, that's what I was thinking, because that gets you right to the edge. And then the people who do buy it are going to be committed to it. They're going to be seriously
And then
interested
we'll
in
probably-
making the device work and engaging with it, reading the instructions and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yes. But this is just to show like at what customer expecting. Like this is the model design.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we do have another version of 299.
Yeah, it might be useful to kind of rerun the numbers with a $200 price point or something like
Okay.
that.
Go to your pro forma statement. Go to your pro forma, your pro forma slide.
Your income statement.
Oh.
Income statement. There you go. That's it.
This is at a $250 price point, right?
Is it?
Yeah, this one is.
Yeah.
Is it 100, right?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Wait, where's it?
It's
at the
not.
bottom.
Oh, then you just,
It's-
multiply it. Yeah, okay.
So that thing, you're going where I was going to go in terms of the income statement was done kind of in the middle of the presentation. And your phased approach was shown at the end.
Mhm.
And I was curious, is the phased approach in your income statement? And does it show the various distribution models as you go from year to year to year? And does this focus on the first time mothers or is this all the mothers?
All of them.
So the income statement is really like a best case analysis, right? With the highest price point,
Mhm.
the largest market segment,
Yeah.
everything, right?
It is.
And in that sense, I would recommend you put it at the end and you show it as your best case.
Okay.
And you might even show other cases that are saying, hey, you may not be able to launch at 250. In fact, your own data says you can't launch at 250.
Hmm.
So ironically, you've actually contradicted yourself in your presentation because you said you can't sell it at 250. So here's an income statement at 250. Right.
Yeah, I don't get it. And anyway, at the bottom of your slide says $100 in MSRP was the assumption in these numbers.
I think that might be a typo because we were changing.
switched it
last minute, so there might be a typo in the presentations.
Because I was wondering, I mean, it's rare that a startup has,
Yeah.
net profit and EBITDA
So
positive so early, like year two.
yeah, so the number is based on the 299 price.
290,
299.
even above what you can't sell.
255 is what I come up with. If you just look at the
Yeah,
device.
the sentence which we saw thousand times 255 is 12.
I think because the model that we built has like there's like small cost whatever, so they didn't put it in or I don't remember exactly what the Excel shows, but it's supposed to be the 299.
Which just divide 12 million by 47,000, you come up with 255.
I'll double check.
Anyway, a lot of numbers are sort of mixed up here, but then my other question to relate to this slide, is it realistic to think you're going to sell almost 50,000 units your first year?
No, this is just the ideal, best case scenario. This is
the best case.
Dream scenario.
Yeah, it's almost like if everything goes perfectly, right? Best on top of
But
best.
this is already like at the year one, we said at 5% capture of whatever the market is.
Yeah. It's probably the ramp would be, anyway, it's an assumption, but just.
Yeah, it is.
I think in general, when you have scenarios, you try multiple scenarios. There's the kind of best case, worst case, modest case, so that.
That's why we have this one, and then we have the one which just shows the 100. So we can make another one for like 200, and then we'll see.
Good to bracket it down. Anyway, a lot of great information though.
Otherwise, thank you. Good job. Well done.
Thanks, Malika.
Thank you.
So before we start Rhaeos, I guess we do have some pizza outside. Is it ready to go, Sar? Ready to go? So why don't we grab some pizza, come back, and then Rhaeos can be ready to present.
Yeah, you're definitive. What is it? Just no.
Yeah.
It's just.
It's your business, so
Yeah.
you know where everything goes, where it comes from, right? It's not really your best thing.
Job transition, I said.
Great experience.
Yeah.
How's the pizza?
Yeah.
Yeah, with all. We'll get more of that loose stuff. It was a good reason for you to pull back out.
Oh, yeah.
Did you, like, I didn't touch base to take it, if you're curious about that, I think it's finished. One of the things I said was the actors yourself, it's a good, it's actually, just just a model. I mean, you know, it's a house, assumptions, the numbers.
We could, we do this course, they got 2 years from now, we should get a light.
Yeah. Well, and everything. I was talking to Mark. I think that the foundation of watch, your action. He's gone on Slack. That's just AI. For the most part, it's all plastic. I mean, it isn't about the numbers, but that's why I try to.
Yeah, it's a surprise point. It's kind of.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You can really see the compliance.
No, just we did. How you did hard.
可能会有点相对不少。
这块而且大家都提出光，就是是公开的。Yeah, but that's the one thing I did. I'm very busy. So yeah, that's.
他们有跟我讨论过其他的业绩，因为觉得然后去或者去
哦，这是好事啊！
就他们的会会是
真过去了。
或者别
我觉得我，但问题是他这个经常搞，他也发出他也是挺多的。结果他知道，他知道怎么说，为什么这个啊，那我不是剪头发。Yeah, this is还可以。说一个目标达到，你跟那锅盖头似的，自然简单。太好了，那我们这个抽奖，然后这有长的好，聊到了好，这个你说他的好的，他有的这个这样的那个，然后他其实总归要我
看一个，这个不是一个那个买个口罩。
对，I think it's about因为做的上完全离开，大概做的越
上线的
I think there are Well, there's somebody plans for summer park. A little
bit of teaching and probably do a vacation. I'm looking to maybe look for us. We like Minneapolis.
Yeah.
It's been 8 years there.
I got some friends there. My wife does.
Gotta go out north.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ely?
Well, I've been to Ely lots of times. Usually in the winter.
Well, that's for, I guess, outward bound. Because we have a sign. Demarcation from Ely.
Yeah.
If Rhaeos is ready, I hate to interrupt your food, but it'll still be there when you get back. What are you trying to go someplace?
Nowhere in particular, yeah.
Yeah, this should be the this.
What did you think of this? Yes, some of that, right? I don't know what happened. They're still gonna have that. Yeah.
I didn't hear back from that guy.
I'm sure he's.
Yeah. I gotta be pretty excited.
Hopefully it'll be good.
Did you know him from your Motorola days or?
Well, actually, from my actual bleeding, I was in the border post. He was.
Yeah.
I was kind of just writing. And then he left. The president came in. This doesn't really work. And I fixed it pretty fast. But he, now he's running the seminar, and I guess, up and up.
It's just not.
Are you guys on Zoom?
Yes, I should be sure.
You're able to get in? I'll take her best. Okay, we're ready to go. Take it away, Rhaeos.
Okay. Hi everyone, we're the Rhaeos team. I'm Romani.
I'm Jennifer. I'm gonna.
So I'm gonna start by just introducing the company and the technology really quickly. So Rhaeos is a real-time fluid flow sensing platform. It was originally used for hydrocephalus shunt failure detection. But now we've been tasked with looking into two main areas, one being IV extravasation and the second being venous flow. And so basically we were just going through identifying some broad use cases, doing some quantitative analysis for that, and then really getting into user interviews and sort of market projections for the project. So specifically discussing the IV extravasation, there's a really big gap in a lot of areas in patient care and outpatient care with extravasation, mostly because most of the monitoring methods right now are intermittent checks. You also have some issues within those of having placements with limited visibility and within patient populations where you don't have feedback. So this is in elderly patients, unconscious patients, pediatric patients who can't communicate that back to you. So our goal here was to really tease out what the best specific use cases are for this application in terms of clinical need, the workflow fit, and overall commercial opportunity for Rhaeos. So our second branch for this project was in cardiac monitoring. There's this really big trend right now with continuous monitoring. And within that, I think Rhaeos positioning is that if you could combine this technology with a heart rate monitor or something else, then you could start getting continuous hemodynamic monitoring. And it's a really big market. It's really hot right now. So we kind of wanted to generally explore what the potential interest could be in this area. But this sort of sub-project was more vague, just in the sense that there was sort of an unclear definition of what the metric is going to be, what clinical action would be taken. And so our goal for this part of the project was really to just sort of wade the waters and define, is there any clinical interest to begin with in this area? And what would that sort of look like and shape up to be? And what direction should they take in future R&D to sort of really develop that out? So I'm just going to overall go through our use case ideation. This is where we started. We came up with, I think, 20 or 30 use cases between the two projects. And our first sort of cut down of that was this quantitative scoring model. So within these 5 categories, we had a bunch of metrics and sort of used a scoring metric within that to evaluate what our top 6 would be. And so we came up with prone surgery, NICU, PICU, chemotherapy, and home infusion for the IV extravasation. And then under cardiac, sort of trauma cases, and then heart decompensation or anything in heart failure, really, to sort of move forward with our interviews. And so across first, I think, the middle 6 weeks, we were able to get 45 interviews done, which is very informative for us, very interesting. And this was across clinicians, nurses, CNOs, quality teams. We even talked to a couple of the clinicians or nurses at places where IV Watch, which is in IV extravasation, a big competitor, where they had some partnerships to kind of get their feedback on that. And then even EMS paramedics and hospital ops stakeholders like on the value analysis committees for that. So it was very informative to get the full picture of the workflow. And these are just some really big takeaways with the IV interviews that we had. I wanted to focus on that because that was what majority of our interviews were from. And the big things first that we confirmed, so over almost 70% of interviewees told us that the biggest gap is this intermittent checking, which is something that we had an idea of before, but it was good to kind of confirm that. The second thing was that we were really able to identify which drugs and which infusions were the highest risk. So that turned out to be vasopressors, TPN, calcium, potassium, hyposmolar fluids, which we weren't really aware of as an issue before. And then even within chemotherapy, we were able to sort of identify which drugs that are new on the market or not technically classified as vesicants, but are irritants, but still have the same issues, were the most relevant for these applications. And then the other thing that actually came out, which I didn't think was going to be as emphasized as it is that the false alarm rate for nurses is a huge factor. And this was in almost every other interview that I did within nursing and extravasation, was that they wouldn't consider it at all if there was any kind of false alarm rate. And so that was something that they really wanted to be taken into whatever algorithm that would come along with the technology. Was really making sure that that was validated out because they don't need another alarm going off in the NICU or the PICU. And then the other thing that was really important, especially for clinicians, was that it would detect early enough. So that means that, far before you're getting any swelling or anything like that, which would come with the technology. So it was good that we could know to fulfill with the technology.
So in addition to conducting stakeholder interviews, we also evaluate the current competitive landscape for IV extravasation detection. Today, the SOC remains manual at the visual assessment performed by nurses. While this approach works for visible IV site and clear fluid, but it is intermittent, highly labor intensive, and difficult to apply in situations where the IV site is hidden for inaccessible. Several technology-based solutions have been developed to address the limitation. IVWatch is currently one of the leading commercial solutions for infiltration detection and provides continuous optical monitoring. However, several limitations have been reported, include a wired architecture and that may reduce mobility, susceptibility to motion artifacts, and that can affect signal quality and optical performance variability across different skin tones. These limitations may create challenges in long duration monitoring and broader deployment across diverse patient populations. Other systems such as BD Alliance and ICU medical alarm 360 rely on pressure-based monitoring. These systems can provide continuous surveillance and but generally detect downstream pressure changes rather than directly monitoring tissue changes at the IV site. As a result, this ability to identify all infiltration or extravasation events may be limited, particularly in more complex clinical scenarios. Compared with existing approaches, our products used thermal sensing to directly monitor physiologic changes around the IV insertion site. As shown in the table, it is designed to support continuous monitoring, wearable, and wireless operation, home and outpatient use, and situations where the IV site may be hidden, such as prone surgery. Next, we evaluate the 4 use case, the market analysis of the 4 use cases. To enable a consistent comparison across segments, we estimated the STEM market using annual patient volume reported multiple with reported complication rates and an estimated device price of $40 per patch. Among four segments, home infusion represents the largest patient population, with approximately 3.2 million patients usually annually, and estimated market opportunity of roughly 16.6 million per year. DQPQ includes approximately 0.5 million patients annually and demonstrates some of the highest reported complication rates in the literature, ranging from 23% to 78%. Cross-surgery represents approximately 1.1 million patients per year, with reported perioperative in complication around 30 to 20%. Outpatient chemotherapy serves as an estimated 0.56 to 0.65 million patients annually, where reported extravasation rates are relatively low. Repeated infusion cycles can substantially increase annual device utilization and overall market potential. Across all four segments, patient volumes are expected to continue growing over time, supported by broader trends in infusion-based care. The key value drivers and the strategic attractives of each segment will be discussed in the following sections. Next, I will introduce our final conclusions about IV sites and walk through the rationale behind our final market recommendation. After combining our market research and interview findings, we selected NICU-PICU as our chemotherapy as our beachhead market and NICU-PICU as our first expansion market. The primary reason is that both settings align strongly with the key criteria we identified throughout this project: high clinical risk, a meaningful monitoring gap, frequent IV use, and strong incentives for intervention. For NICU and PICU, patients are highly vulnerable and often unable to communicate pain or discomfort. Early detection is difficult, IV therapy is frequent, and patient safety is a top priority for clinicians. These factors create a clear need for continuous monitoring and make NICU-PICU an ideal environment to validate both clinical value and the workflow fit. This opportunity is further supported by the relatively high complication rates reported in the literature. Chemotherapy infusion emerged as the strongest beachhead market for similar reasons. With the repeated peripheral infusion sessions, which makes the market much larger and potential. So overall, these two markets stood out not because they are the largest patient populations, but because they offer the strongest combination of clinical needs, workflow fit, and adoption potential for early warning monitoring solution. I also wanted to better explain why the other two use cases ultimately fell out of consideration. Home infusion initially appeared attractive because of its large patient population. However, interviews revealed that many patients receive therapies through PICC lines or other much longer procedures rather than short peripheral IVs, resulting in a very rare infiltration risk. In addition, home infusion patients are carefully screened before enrollment, and both the patient and the home environment must meet safety requirements. As a result, infiltration and extravasation events are uncommon, and the true need for continuous monitoring was lower than we initially expected. Cross-surgery presented a different challenge. Interviewees acknowledge that IV sites can become difficult to access during long procedures and that severe complications are possible. However, these events appear to be relatively uncommon, and existing nastier workflows already provide multiple layers of monitoring and risk mitigation. Most importantly, with limited evidence of
strong willingness to pay for a dedicated monitoring solution in this setting. Overall, interviews suggested that neither home infusion nor cross-surgery offer the same combination of clinical urgency, monitoring gap, and adoption potential that we observed in the previous two use cases. Our proposed solution is a nurse burst alarm system. A wearable thermal sensor is placed near the peripheral of IV sites and continuously monitors for abnormal flow or leakage patterns associated with infiltration or extravasation. When concerning changes are detected, the system alerts the nurse before visible tissue injury develops. Importantly, the device is designed to fit within existing nursing workflows. After receiving an alert, nurses would follow the standard clinical response process, assess the IV site, pause the infusion if necessary, evaluate blood return and flushing, and replace the IV if concerns persist. The device therefore supports clinical decision-making rather than replacing it. The value proposition is centered on earlier intervention, which fits the two high-risk cases. Additional advantages include long battery life for continuous monitoring throughout nursing shifts, simple replacement that requires minimal workflow disruption, and the ability to prioritize monitoring for high-risk infusions such as TPM, calcium containing solutions, and recent chemotherapy agents. Overall, the technology is intended to function as an early warning tool that enables faster clinical response in the patient populations, where delayed detection carries the greatest consequences.
So for the IV application, we built the business model around the two use cases, the first being NICU PICU, the second being the outpatient chemotherapy. For NICU and PICU, we chose a per patient disposable monitoring fee. We chose this just because we estimate that each of these episodes would last 1 to 3 days. So instead of charging by the hour, we thought it would make more sense to charge per patient. And we kind of assumed the price we were thinking about was $120. This is $100 for the sensor itself, and then $20 software fee. And then the logic basically behind that is the sensor is the core physical product, but the software fee kind of captures the value of like the alerts, analytics, and the integrations. For outpatient chemotherapy, we decided to do a per infusion disposable monitoring fee, and we wanted to do $140 per infusion, made up of a $100 disposable sensor fee and then a $40 software fee. We kind of assumed a higher software fee here because they might place more value on analytics in this field. So we thought that we could factor that into the price. And then moving on to the unit economics, we kind of made a conservative model and then a target model. So for our conservative case, like I said before, $120, and then we factored in around $55 as a variable cost, which is around 54% gross margin. The variable cost kind of includes the manufacturing costs, packaging, onboarding, analytics, etc. So it's not just the physical cost of building the sensor. And then for the target case, we were considering trying to increase that price point to $150 and then decreasing our variable cost to $42, which would give us a higher gross margin of 72%. And then in terms of the cost of acquisition, we were looking at the amount of patients that were monitored and then how much profit we would need to pay that back. And then moving on to the outpatient chemotherapy, again, the conservative being 140, target being 190, gross margins being 43% and 66%, which represent pretty positive feedback in terms of like making a return on like, investments. So this is our pro forma income statement for 5 years. This kind of based on our assumption that we would start with the chemo infusion, pilot it out, and then move on to NICU and PICU. So in our first year, this is a pretty conservative model. We were thinking maybe we could start out with 1 chemo infusion center and then 0 NICU, and then in the second year increase chemo to 2 and NICU to 1. Based on that, we've seen total revenue grow from 84K in year 1 to 1.72 million, which seems very positive. I also like discounted it, like the new centers by like 50% to count for like the rolling on period, since they won't have the same utilization rate. And then in terms of operating expenses, kind of calculated sales and marketing, R&D. In terms of why the R&D and clinical support kind of go down, we kind of thought that by the time like the product is more used, we might not need to do as much like work to like roll it out. It'll be more of a smoother process. So we thought we could probably decrease that within the next 5 years. And overall, we see that we break even in year 3, which sounds very positive for a startup. And then in year 5, we have a $459,000 profit. In terms of next steps, we would recommend beginning with GYN oncology peripheral infusions, just because this is a setting where patients may not always have ports, or irritant non-vesicant drugs can still cause painful swelling or like burn reactions. The second step would be to design the nurse first actionability, so that the device isn't just like a passive monitoring system, but it would like alert the nurses. And then the third is to kind of build evidence for us to like expand. This would be from the pilot, gather data, probably interview people to understand like what Rhaeos could do and show that Rhaeos is a valid product that fits the market. Moving on to our cardiac conclusions. So for cardiac, we looked at 2 possible market opportunities, which were heart failure decompensation and then trauma or in-field monitoring. For heart failure, the patient population is quite large, with 6.9 million heart failure patients. And this matters just because hospitals can face penalties for excess readmissions, since there is a 19% 30-day readmission rate. So even a small reduction there could create some value. And moving on to the second, trauma and in-field monitoring, there's around 3 million trauma admissions per year. And the total trauma cost burden is around 95 billion. So this market also looks promising in terms of using this device to monitor before bigger damage happens. Moving on to the competitive analysis, we kind of compared it to ECG devices, implantable sensors, standard care. It looks like ECG devices were relatively lower in cost and non-invasive, but they don't directly measure hemodynamic flow, which might be important. Implantable sensors were also a very clinically capable option. They are continuous monitoring, but they're a bit more expensive and invasive, which kind of limits the adoption in higher risk patients. Standard care like vitals checkups is not continuous, but it can sometimes identify those problems. And we found that our product is kind of positioned between these options, where it would likely cost more than standard care, but instead it would be continuous, hemodynamic, and detect early.
So regarding our cardiac interviews, we mostly just targeted talking to clinicians and researchers in the field, just because we kind of wanted a balance between, what they're currently getting now and then sort of people who had some kind of idea of direction of where it could go. And I think the biggest takeaway here was that we really need to define more clearly within the technology of what exactly it could do. I think almost everyone we talked to essentially this could be a game changer, because within hemodynamics, I think there's some people who are measuring very locally, like pressures and things like that for decompensation, but there's no sort of assessment of overall like cardiac output flow, something analogous to that. So it would be something really useful, and particularly the one case that kept getting mentioned time and time again was in this 30-day discharge period, because the key sort of monetary value there is in lowering your readmission rates. And I think the other thing that came out that is really important to note is that While a lot of the clinicians acknowledged how useful it would be, there was sort of a big concern of, okay, if we're changing from having these intermittent checkups or like, when you're going to get data and how it's going to work to sort of now you have this continuous access to data, that really is a big change on the clinician level of how their workflow is changing because now they are having to constantly go back and look at patients. So also thinking about, sort of developing out, I don't know if it looks like an alert system or if the clinicians really want to look at all of that data. They didn't know because they didn't know how useful the data would be yet because they haven't got a chance to look at it. But I think the positive thing from this is that it definitely confirmed that there is a huge interest there. It's just sort of teasing out after validating the device, what exactly where the data could go and what it could be compared to. And so I think the next steps are to go back to now that we've had sort of confirmation of interest and do some benchtop testing and see what specific sort of, I don't know how you would describe, but like metric it best compares to. And so I think then you could really define it for clinicians and present it back to them and be like, this is what it's most analogous to. Because it's a lot for them to sort of be imaginative and thinking about how it works. And I think then you could run it with a pilot study against, like the intermittent measurements, so ultrasound, cardiac output, echo, and see how it compares. And I think from there, once you know how it stacks up against current technology, you can either continue down the clinical path, or you could even, a lot of the clinicians are saying, we could pivot and sort of integrate it into like an Apple Watch setting, and it could be a sort of health monitoring thing for people to use because that's also such a trend right now is people really getting in charge of proactive health. But I think overall, the interviews really gave us a sort of good confirmation that this is a path worth going down and sort of continuing R&D on. So, yeah.
Nice job.
Yeah, so I think you guys really nice job. You guys did especially a super impressive job, a ton of interviews and direct feedback from a lot of people, which was one of your biggest client asks from me. So those were really, really nice. And I think I think you guys showed the nice dichotomy between a pretty well-defined product and let's build out the business model versus the challenge potentially that comes ahead of a product that's something new in a new set of information and data. What's that mean to commercialize that? So I think the recommendations are really, really good there. I'm curious for two questions. One, you guys talked about a lot of feedback being, especially on IV activation and really quick response, right? And identifying things before they're visible and before they come through. I don't think we talked about it, but what do you guys think about kind of back to the idea of partnerships? Would you recommend trying to integrate the device with an infusion pump system so that you can actually stop the pump when it's detected? Or how would you think about that business model side of it?
I think from at least I'm taking it from an interview perspective, I think there was a little bit of hesitation in terms of trust in the technology at first. So I could see it. I don't even know if this is viable in terms of business wise, it's a smart thing to do, but first having it as a standalone system. And then, once there's sort of trust built there, then or if you find a company that's willing to partner with, especially within outpatient chemo, I can see that being a viable option. But I think sort of validating that the device is trustworthy first, and then going into, it'll immediately stop the infusion could be a path that I think nurses could get behind. This is sort of their perspective.
Sure. And then one other one, I think in one spot you guys had a $40 price point. I think another spot you had 120 or maybe higher. I was curious about how much of that, especially the higher price point, or how much did you gather from interviews on, if any at all, what pricing sensitivity might be? And maybe it's different between the you with infusions and all
that. Yeah, I think from my interpretation, I think I talked to one, she was a CNO who was she was involved with the value analysis committees. And she was saying, from balancing both perspectives, as long as the pricing for NICU PICU at least is it lasts. I think it also really depends on how long the device lasts. But if you have one device that's continuous for however long they're staying, then it's really just about, how if you can price it so that it's disposable and it'll add enough value, that it'll be fine. For the chemotherapy, they said you would speak to this also. But I think since it's outpatient and a lot of the clinics that we talked to were more of the private route of outpatient clinics, that's why we ended up doing the pricing higher, is because it's sort of seen as a higher risk in terms of if you're getting into irritants and vesicants. And then B, because it's sort of lower time frame, you could price it out that way. They were more comfortable doing it at a higher price. What was the impression I was getting? But
yeah, I think for the chemotherapy things, I noticed that most of on average, every chemotherapy patient will take like 11 to 12 infusions every year. So I think it's hard for them to wear it all day. Just so I think maybe they need to use one once they take one infusion. So for one patient, it's probably they need like 12 patches annually. So I think for this part, it should be like kind of maybe lower price can be more adoptable, and since it's outpatient, so I think the price for outpatient treatment is usually kind of lower than the inpatient. So yeah.
Great. I'll follow up some more.
As long as we're talking business models and partnerships, you would kind of think outside the box here. You're talking about a per unit price, $90, $120, whatever it is. On the cardiac side, readmissions, I'm assuming it probably has a multi-million-dollar impact on the bottom line of any hospital that's on the wrong side of the readmissions curve, right? If you can bring them to the right side, save them millions of dollars, would they be willing to share that gain with you? And now this is a gain share model that says, okay, we want 20% of the savings, and this hospital keeps 80%. And it becomes more of a consultative instead of a widget-based model, right? So you're working with patients, you're giving them the wearables, you're collecting the data, you're analyzing it, you're working with the physicians. In a sense, you're embedded into the system instead of just saying, here's a device, good luck. Does that make any sense? I mean, I don't know what and how the hospitals get hurt financially for having readmissions below the line.
I mean, it makes sense to me. I think I don't know if that's something that's done.
Well, it's done from like a consulting house would probably think of that at first.
Yeah.
A manufacturing house would think about what you've been doing, which is selling a widget, right? Yeah. Maybe there's a blended model here, and I don't know if cardiac is distinct or maybe these apply to chemo and some of these other categories. But I got to give you guys a lot of credit. You did a lot of great interviews. The insights were exactly spot on with what we were hoping you would achieve, which is a level of subtlety and a level of insight that you can't get from just superficially talking to 4 or 5 people, right? You did 45 people, which is amazing. So I got to give you a lot of credit. Anything else?
Yeah, I think you guys probably set the record. which is
this year or overall years?
Maybe overall. I don't know. Yeah, you get the gold medal.
I'll take that.
But even if it's just not the quantity, but the quality of the insights that you had, I'm sure if I had asked you, if you'd only done half the interviews, would you have been able to come up with the same insights?
I don't think so. Yeah. Well, because it's like, everyone has a different perspective. And then I think we ended up actually getting to talk to people from, it was like all kinds of backgrounds, private, public, big city, rural, like international hospitals. So everybody has a different perspective and priority. So it's pretty interesting.
Okay.
Great job.
Thank you. Nice job. Epicore, you are next. Ruse, you still with us?
I am.
All right. Sorry for the marathon.
No, all good.
We didn't even send you any pizza.
Good talks.
Rhaeos goes for the pizza. But Epicore, take it away.
All right, so today we're going to go through our final recommendations for, of course, clinical market focus. The main question, again, we were tasked with was where Epicore should focus first. And what we concluded with isn't as straightforward as just one market approach. It's more of a tactical dual market approach on both sides. And so we looked at the market and how it can create clinical value and generate evidence, attract more realistic partners, but also trying to build something that's realistic and actually feasible. So we're going to start by framing how we evaluated these different markets. And then we're going to move into our two selected markets, cystic fibrosis and chronic kidney disease. And then we want to present how these two market entries are able to compound into a further revenue model and a larger scale 5-year plan, and some of these more specific recommendations we have for Epicore. So we started at looking at these different markets against screening criteria. So these range from clinical unmet need to the biomarker and product fit to some of the workflow elements, including reimbursement, and then some of those partnership potentials that can affect speed of adoption. And so we started with these three market spaces. And while we found that acute kidney injury has a urgent clinical need, the product would depend really heavily on hospital and ICU integration. That was the space that we identified. And so we think that it would make more sense to focus on these first two market sets. And so after some of these screening and a bunch of comparison, we came down to cystic fibrosis and chronic kidney disease. Cystic fibrosis is a smaller market, but the biomarker aspects are already validated in literature. I mean, the diagnosis is tied directly to CFTR modulator response. On the other side, we have chronic kidney disease, which is much larger of a market, but the monitoring model itself is much less proven. And because the current care still runs through these episodic episodes of blood and urine tests, we see a difference in both of these that like tactically bounce off of each other and help push both into market. And so we decided to choose cystic fibrosis first and chronic kidney disease second as market entry. And we'll dive into these a little bit more. The big pieces that we found was first, cystic fibrosis is not only a US monitoring issue. The global diagnostic access gap is a very real wedge that we identified, and especially in places where we see limited sweat testing infrastructure and the lower, reducing the friction in these testings can really matter in those real-time moments. The second piece is that adult cystic fibrosis monitoring should be very much targeted rather than a broad tracking for larger groups of individuals. And that patients doing well on modulators are mostly managing their symptoms through routine visits. And they don't want to have an additional number or an additional data set unless it's actually contributing to their treatment. And the stronger cystic fibrosis monitoring case that we see are these like non-response or adherence or clinical trial pieces, along with expanding biomarkers. And then lastly, we have that chronic kidney disease is a really large market. It's a massive market across globally and in the US. But the use case for entry has to be very narrow. And right now, chronic kidney disease screening is a little bit too diffuse. And so we're going to talk about that kind of entry pathway through nephrology, but in some of this remote patient monitoring aspects. But as of now, we'll move into cystic fibrosis, but we're looking at cystic fibrosis first, and then chronic kidney disease second, once we have some validation aspects.
Okay, so now moving into cystic fibrosis and the market. Before getting into the market and what we did, looking at the current standard of care, currently today the cystic fibrosis diagnosis relies heavily on sweat chloride measurement, and the typical or the most latest technology, I would say, currently measuring sweat chloride levels is macroduct
It's called macroduct, and it's followed by fluoride analysis. And this workflow still requires the usual pilocarpine iontophoresis, dedicated collection equipment, trained personnel, and like access to specialized testing centers. And as a result, like obtaining a sweat chloride measurement can be very time invasive and infrastructure dependent, particularly like outside major CF centers. And Epicore comes in place here, where it kind of measures the same biomarker, which is sweat chloride, which is the gold standard currently, but through a soft skin-like wearable. And it is capable of collecting and analyzing sweat in a much smaller device, especially for like neonatal patients. But it could have a very high output of the sweat collection and which plays a major role, especially when it comes to kids, and you're not able to collect a required volume of sweat, and at times it needs to be redone a lot, so it makes it very patient friendly. So to start with, I think it's important to understand like why cystic fibrosis is the strongest opportunity to start with. It's actually how dramatically the treatment landscape has changed over the past few years. So like historically, sweat chloride was primarily just a diagnostic biomarker. But so basically, once a patient received a diagnosis, sweat chloride had like relatively low role in like the ongoing management. But one thing that changed that was the introduction of the CFTR modulators, especially Trikafta, because the clinical trials demonstrated like approximately a 14-point improvement in lung function and almost 63% reduction in pulmonary exacerbations and a reduction in sweat chloride of more than 40 millimolar per liter. What is important here is not simply like the outcomes we see of Trikafta, but what is important is that sweat chloride actually evolved from just being a diagnostic marker to becoming a marker for the treatment response of the CFTR modulators. And also like just to back up with some recent evidence, one of a study done in 2025, which pooled analysis from 1,300 patients actually treated with CFTR modulators showed that lower sweat chloride levels were associated with better lung function, better quality of life scores, improved BMI, and fewer pulmonary exacerbations. So basically, sweat chloride is not just telling us, helping us with diagnosis, but it moves it further. So looking at the overall global opportunity when it comes to cystic fibrosis, today approximately 105,000 individuals are diagnosed with cystic fibrosis worldwide. However, recent estimates suggest that the true population may exceed 160,000 individuals, and which leaves almost 57,000 potential undiagnosed patients. What becomes like apparent is that the access to care remains highly uneven across regions. Countries such as the United States, Canada, UK, Germany have extensive CF infrastructure and specialized centers. However, many regions continue to face like substantial barriers to diagnostic testing and long-term monitoring. One of the most interesting findings from our interviews, which align closely with these numbers, was that several clinicians, they discuss the challenges associated with actually accessing the specialized sweat testing centers, particularly in regions such as South Africa, where patients need to travel like almost 6 to 7 hours to like go to the center and get their sweat chloride tested. So coming to the current diagnostic pathway, we felt that it's better to understand where these barriers are. And from the current pathway, we can see that although the gold standard currently is sweat chloride, it's highly effective. It still requires like a multi-step process in the testing, where the patients need to go through a pilocarpine iontophoresis, sweat collected, then a chloridometry, and then there are trained personnel and testing centers involved in this process. So few of the concerns when it comes to this test is the limitation called quantity not sufficient, where the rates in pediatric populations is almost 40%, and this requires a repeat in the testing procedure. And also, the main challenges that we observed was accessibility, the convenience, the infrastructure requirements, and repeatability. And I feel the distinction is important because it changes how we evaluate Epicore's technology, where the question is not whether we can actually replace already accurate diagnostic testing device, because that already exists. But now the question is if we can reduce the friction associated with actually accessing it and not being able to repeat these tests. So we did conduct multiple clinician interviews and some patient interviews, and this was a change when we moved from all the literature findings that we presented earlier. So instead, what we wanted to understand now with these clinician interviews was whether the unmet needs actually identified was reflected in the real world clinical practice. And across these interviews, there were almost three main themes that emerged constantly. One was that the access issue, where challenges related to the specialized testing infrastructure, especially with the clinician we interviewed from South Africa, where they mainly mentioned that many of the pediatric patients, before they are even diagnosed for cystic fibrosis, they are diagnosed with malnutrition and their health deteriorates drastically. And the second one was the treatment response variability, where while CFTR modulators have transformed outcomes of patients drastically, clinicians still highlighted that the treatment response is not uniform across all patients, and it's creating situations where additional insight into CFTR function may be valuable. And the third theme was just having a more actionable data where patients generally, especially this was more from the patient's point of view, where they did view the wearable monitoring favorably, particularly when it could reduce clinic visits or testing burden. However, discussions frequently expanded beyond sweat chloride alone and focused on aspects such as the disease management, including nutrition, digestion complications, exercise tolerance, and overall their other organ health. Yeah. So moving on to the CFTR modulator market currently, after understanding the clinical aspect, one of the key observations from our analysis is that the diagnosis is just a one-time event, whereas if we target the CFTR modulator market, it is a continuous monitoring and it has a very recurring opportunity available. And this creates a potential opportunity for sweat chloride to function as a treatment response biomarker rather than just a solely diagnostic marker. From a commercial perspective, this expands the potential customer base beyond patients alone. Clinicians may use these measurements to better understand treatment response. Clinical trials may use them as pharmacodynamic endpoints. And pharmaceutical companies developing CFTR therapies may have an interest in tools that help evaluate efficacy, adherence, and overall longitudinal response. These are the CFTR modulators available right now. Trikafta being one of the main modulator where it works on almost 90% of the CF patients. And it has changed drastically, and all these clinical trials have endpoints which are related to the sweat chloride levels. So coming to the partnership opportunity, the first group actually includes pharmaceutical companies as discussed, and being involved with CFTR modulator development. These organizations already are currently using sweat chloride as an important endpoint in clinical trials, and they represent a potential collaborator for treatment response and real-world evidence initiatives. The second group includes organizations such as the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and related patient advocacy groups. These organizations actually play a critical role in terms of research funding, patient engagement and access initiatives. And the third group includes CF centers, academic institutions, and clinical networks. One of the encouraging findings from this analysis is that Epicore would be entering already a well-established ecosystem. So, and it already has a market opportunity when it comes to these networks. So coming to the initial market entry, an important question we considered was not simply what the technology could do, but where it could create the most value initially. Based on both literature and the interview findings, a broad daily monitoring for all patients does not appear to be the most compelling first use case. Instead, the strongest initial opportunity would appear to be concentrated in three areas. First, improving access to sweat testing regions where specialized infrastructure is limited currently, especially in regions in the Middle Eastern countries, South Africa, South India, etc. Second would be supporting patients where treatment response may be uncertain or variable, especially when it comes to CFTR modulators. And third would be in supporting clinical research and having decentralized clinical trial models. These applications address areas where uncertainty is the highest and where additional information may have the greatest clinical impact. So coming to the future platform opportunity, while fluoride remains the most clinically validated biomarker in cystic fibrosis, several themes occurred, especially in the interviews when we were talking to clinicians about the current care management when it comes to the disease. And it suggested that they wanted to we frequently discussed on about the nutritional changes, the pancreatic enzymes, the digestive complications, and the overall broader disease management concerns. And interestingly, Epicore's own research already has demonstrated the ability to measure analytes such as zinc, iron, in addition to chloride. So as a result, one future direction could involve expanding from just sweat chloride towards a more broader biomarker platform approach where it would be more useful for the patient's daily life since cystic fibrosis affects multiple organs, especially the digestive issue, and it would also help manage to identify malnutrition in pediatric patients. Yeah, so just coming to the overall final recommendation, since cystic fibrosis represents Epicore's strongest near-term indication, and it combines the main important factors, having a clinically validated sweat biomarker, a well-defined patient population and care network, substantial body of already published evidence, and multiple unmet needs that remain relevant to major therapeutic advances. Importantly, our analysis suggests that the most compelling opportunities extend beyond the diagnosis alone and more in overall being able to manage the CFTR modulator therapy and seeing if it's working.
So now we're going to move into chronic kidney disease. Now this is what we see as the biggest long-term upside of the market entry. But it's not necessarily the cleanest place to start. And so we're looking at that kind of key question where, how could these kidney trend signals that clinicians be looked at between standard lab visits? So we talked about this a little bit in some of the previous presentations, but a quick overview. Chronic kidney disease affects over 36 million adults in the US. And a lot of the population of those adults is unaware. The current care is built around accepted bio lab markers such as EGFR and some urine tests as well. And so these markers are very much accepted as clinically meaningful aspects. But the biggest issue we see is that these happen and they're collected periodically. And so clinicians are really managing these chronic diseases with just limited snapshots. And so rather than replacing, you could frame Epicore as an entry to replacing these kidney labs earlier. but we see it as more of an entry between these different snapshots. It's like a realistic approach. These different trends over time allow the care team to be able to check back in, to be able to intervene or escalate before they're seeing their next visit. Now, chronic kidney disease is very much concentrated in identifiable groups. It's easy to find these kind of patients, especially within diabetes or hypertension. You have like lupus and you have other conditions as well along with that. But that really matters commercially because Epicore can't just start with the entire chronic kidney disease population. And a first entry point we see is these patients already in kidney-related care, and they're already getting labs and have already made repeated decisions regarding their care treatment plan. And so we see these entry points of like early detection and remote monitoring and investing in these different biomarkers. And what's interesting is we actually saw some of these numbers change since our last presentation. So we have here that 38% of adults with diabetes are estimated to have chronic kidney disease. In our last presentation, this was 30. So the CDC updated their results showing an upward trend in these numbers. So now looking at what we heard from stakeholders in our last presentation, we hadn't gotten in touch with as many stakeholders in the chronic kidney disease space. We wanted to explore this more. We didn't want to create too many assumptions. And so we wanted to test, we spoke with 3 groups. We spoke with clinicians, patients, and then ecosystem experts in the space. For the clinicians, we focused on current CKD workflows. So how they're using EGFR and UACR lab in labs and what they cannot exactly see between their visits. And on the patient end of things, we focused on trying to understand what it's like to manage their chronic kidney disease day to day and how consistently they monitor these aspects. In the ecosystem side, we tried to dive into the reimbursement pathways, specifically like provider adoption and how those partnerships play into market fit. And so from some of our findings, we found that these big 4 pieces. First, that the monitoring is episodic and that it's very much lab dependent. So there's this visibility gap between different visits. The second is that chronic kidney disease progresses over the years. And so adoption is slower than a broader diagnostic access market like cystic fibrosis. And third is that this is very much behavioral driven, in that a big piece of this is medication adherence, diet, and blood pressure control, and all of these different follow-up pieces with treatment that all play into this. And lastly, nephrologists need these trends to be very much actionable. And we know that we would like to provide this market with things beyond just isolated like raw sweat values. And so it means that Epicore needs to be able to interpret these signals rather than just raw data. And the literature right now doesn't necessarily suggest that all of these pieces, this interpretation of this data has fully come to market. And so some useful signals that we saw when we were talking to some stakeholders is that there's the signal of a lab order where during a visit, they're ordering from the lab. And so that could signal some different pieces. You could track that through the EMR, et cetera. Some other pieces are there's scheduled medication reviews, and the doctors are checking on adherence along with possible diet interventions or any escalation of treatment. And without those kind of actionable links, we see that chronic kidney disease entry for Epicore becomes much more of a broader device market rather than a specific product. And so really narrowing on those different entry pathways we see is valuable. And so we see it very much as a secondary market. Our overall thesis regarding chronic kidney disease is intentionally erring on the side of caution. The market is extremely large. A majority of the population is underdiagnosed. And there's a connection to, we know that, right, it's connected to diabetes and hypertension and long-term care costs. And it makes chronic kidney disease really strategically important for Epicore. But as a lead market, it's still we see as too unproven. And so that almost make or break question that we're looking at is whether Epicore can create these kidney trend signals that allow these clinicians to act on between different trends. And if the answer is yes here, then we see it becoming a really attractive secondary market. And if no, the product risks becoming a data for without actually leading to any decisions or treatment efficacy. And so the big gap here is between these different lab visits, because they're really crude diagram through together. But in those triangles, right, we have that time could consider a clinical blind spot between visits. And so clinicians already have these standard markers, and we need to be able to respect that with this market entry. But the issue we see is between these lab snapshots, and here they're all equidistant, but it's possible, right, with scheduling and fitting everything in, that these could be very much separated. And so we see patients when we're interviewing are changing their medication adherence, their hydration or their diet or their blood pressure control medications, and along with their kidney risk between all these visits. And so rather than Epicore replacing EGFR or UACR at the start of this journey, we see the stronger role being to flag a meaningful change earlier. And that flag needs to occur only if we're able to confirm with labs, review with the medication and check all this adherence in turn with these markers that we're measuring. So looking at how some of the logic and reasoning behind some of this action that we see for chronic kidney disease is first, the patch is able to collect sweat at home or in the clinic. Second, the Epicore is able to measure all these different pieces, right? Like urea, creatine, electrolytes, pH. Third is that the system needs to be able to normalize the sweat rate, hydration, and sample quality. These things are very variable over time. And fourth is that we see a trend in confidence level with these different pieces by incorporating different data aspects. And then lastly, adding in these lab orders or review medications and being able to adjust diet. A lot of these pieces need to be actionable, and we don't see a trend over time where without getting baselines or different pieces, these baselines can shift. And so we see the best pilot for entering chronic kidney disease as high-risk primary care as a bigger pool. So stage 3 or 4 nephrology or remote patient monitoring as the best first pilot. The reason is this group is really well defined. These baselines in literature already exist. And so it makes a lot of that trial and error getting those baselines correct much easier. The follow-ups are much more reoccurring in this space. And clinicians already have repeat decisions to make. And so another piece is that dialysis adjacent monitoring that has a repeat need, but the sweat workflows are much more challenging. And then along with the transplant and higher risk space, where we see that the stakes here are a little bit clearer, but it would require much more validation clinically. And so we see a path for them to start in this area and then expand if they're able to, if Epicore is able to define some of those baselines and signals. And so I'm going to get into some of those overall pieces, looking at both these markets and how they combine. So the overall recommendation we have for Epicore is that CF gives Epicore the clearest near-term path clinically through credibility. Because sweat biomarkers are accepted in this space, the care pathway does exist, and the partners, possible partnerships could help with that validation and access. CKD, however, is that longer-term market play that we see Epicore only entering if they're able to prove actionability along with partner-led adoption. And so we see these different pieces as cystic fibrosis happening first and then entering chronic kidney disease after. We can see that a little bit in our 5-year plan. It's somewhat rough. So in year 1, we're looking at a response pilot of roughly 250 to 1,000 patients to help prove that workflow through. Year 2, looking at scaling through some of these cystic fibrosis centers. Year 3, looking at more multi-marker areas, trying to prove clinically on these different aspects, looking at correlation studies, doing some paid pilots year 4, and then scaling further, doing some more decision-making in year 5. I'll quickly go, I know we're short on time, but the way we approached the revenue model was trying to view it strategy-wise, not necessarily as formulaic. But our recommendation is that cystic fibrosis is first, and then chronic kidney disease is second. And so for CF, the value comes from several different use cases versus that diagnostic access. especially in places where sweat infrastructure testing is limited. And the second is treatment monitoring, especially where the CFTR modulators are not delivering those expected results. And so in this model, we see that CF starts with a smaller patient pool. And so we're assuming about 5,000 reachable patients initially, which is about 5% of that adoption, which gets us roughly 250 patients. At that scale, the product revenue is really modest, but the big point is that, especially when we're talking with Rhaeos, is that those exact pieces help to enhance that credibility clinically, to prove and build partner access, to allow for that sweat biomarker data to help support more real decisions. And so that's one of the big reasons why we see CF as so valuable, because it gives Epicore a really focused area for them to validate this platform clinically. It also creates early partnership pathways and revenue through clinical studies. So like companion monitoring programs, or some of this real world evidence work with companies like Vertex or other CF ecosystem partners. And once those foundations exist, chronic kidney disease becomes much more interesting. So we have chronic kidney disease as a larger patient population, like I talked about, and that monitoring can expand over those years. But it requires that those patients are staying engaged, and the workflow needs to fit into the nephrology care pipeline. So we modeled chronic kidney disease as a gradual ramp from a narrow high-risk segment, instead of just jumping right to the full chronic kidney disease population. And the biggest takeaway from this is that cystic fibrosis gives Epicore very much that validation in those partnerships. And then that makes chronic kidney disease significantly more attractive once those biomarkers and platform and workflow fit are proven. So yeah, and so moving to our final recommendation, it has these different 4 parts. One is to lead with cystic fibrosis as a near-term clinical commercial beachhead. The second is to use the first 2 years to prove access, response monitoring, and then these partner economics to see if they fit into these real world clinical sweat biomarker workflows. Third is to develop chronic kidney disease as a next market piece, only if that workflow is properly fits and some of those challenges are solved revolving channel economics. And the last piece is to avoid starting in either a market that is too broad or direct to consumer. We don't see either of those aspects. Starting in a D2C market broadens the product too much and doesn't allow it to find clinical fit. But yeah, we'll move to some questions.
All right, thank you. Bruce, any comments?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So Yogita and Jason's just really great job. I think probably the most impressive was the slope of progress from not knowing much about these two disease states, markets, to really getting to the point of demonstrating mastery tonight. I mean, you guys did all this and did it as a team of 2. I think you guys lost a team member along the way. So really powerful stuff. And I remember 2-3 weeks in, you guys had presented some early stuff, and just the slope, the delta to get it to the point where you guys have a full story that I think I could share with the Epicore team and feel good about it is really impressive. So that was really good to see. I guess one thing that John, Chad, Mark, and myself, I think we mentioned it early on, was this notion that there is no right or wrong answer or path in this course. It's you guys, are really creating the journey and figuring out creative ways of answering challenges or questions that don't have a right or wrong answer. And I thought you guys did a really good job of that. With one example of that was how you framed the what to sell first for CF and which part of the market to enter. So really good job. I think overall pretty pretty good. I have two questions, and then I'll hand it off to the other folks. Um, uh, Yagatha, you mentioned beyond chloride, and I think you had a set of different biomarkers, micronutrient targets, and such. Have you thought about in some of the interviews and research you've done? How about some of the biophysical markers? And what I mean by that is things like, what if we were to measure sweat chloride in tandem with like heart rate or cough count? Um, Things like that. Did that come up in any of the interviews or in any of the research?
Yeah, when it comes to patient interviews, the main factor was they keep coughing continuously throughout the day, and it really affects their work. I don't know how useful it would be for the patients to actually measure the cough count because when it comes to cystic fibrosis and the cough, it's very from when the interviews I understood that it's very hard for them. They actually cough out a lot of mucus and it sometimes blood. So I don't really know about measuring the cough count. If that would be more useful for them, I don't really think in that case. But I feel when it comes to the pediatric population, many of the clinicians were mainly focused on the digestive enzymes and because those are one of the first symptoms that they notice when it comes to cystic fibrosis. And it would be very helpful for them to measure that because that's how they get to know that, okay, the disease is progressing right now since it's a chronic disease. So I'm not very sure about measuring any of the physical biomarkers.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's interesting to look at. I think because CF affects so many different organs, you'd expect cardiovascular issues, and whether or not there's progression or a need for management. I think that's something worth looking into deeper. But I agree. I think there's also a lot of really interesting micronutrient and various metabolite related effects. So yeah, that was question one. And then Jason, question two, just quick. You dove into CKD and then sort of landed on the stage 3, stage 4 domain, and there's some challenges with, is there enough pull in the market to warrant monitoring during these intermittent hospital or um, doctor visits with nephrologists. I guess how have you thought about maybe taking a step back, very upstream to that latter stage? And what I mean by that is, what if we were upstream in a preventative um, wellness market mode? So think kidney health and wellness as opposed to stage 2, 3, 4. Sort of thinking about it, the wellness pathway has certain uh, compelling aspects to it. So, you could approach healthy people to get ahead of problems, monitoring some of the same things like creatinine and urea, CRP, potassium. And there's no doubt there's a clinical fit to having an FDA class 2, but just curious if you've thought about or understood the landscape around what if we wanted to go like more upstream preventative.
Yeah, so it's an interesting space because one of the pieces, if you're going anything on the clinical side, is to have baseline labs already existing in that area. And that was the biggest pull, that like it checks multiple boxes along like with repeated workflow and different repeated check-ins. So you have that consistency, but it was the baseline labs already pre-existing in literature that we saw as the biggest pull towards that space. And I think they get a little bit more variable outside of those later stages of CKD.
I think we need to move on. We're out of time. Otherwise, thank you. Nice job. Yeah. Good insights there. Okay, let's finish up with Solventum. We've had a tough road this quarter. Yeah, we appreciate you sticking with it. So does the clients. Yes.
Yeah. All right, take it away. Yeah, so I won't go through everything again. The core goal that we agreed to with Solventum was to essentially identify the most promising market segments and recommend a go-to market path. So just do an analysis of the market and try to understand where the technology, so the coupler, but bioadhesive coupler would fit best and where to start. But at a high level, any ultrasound device needs a coupler between the transducer and the skin, and Solventum can supply this with a today bioadhesive coupler. The wearable ultrasound market is growing fast every year. It's at 2 billion today, and Solventum has a legacy of has a good background in the medical industry and can provide a regulatory ready coupler at high scale. So essentially, right, so you can help reduce time for manufacturers to market by providing them with a ready market ready coupler. Nothing too new here from what I had presented before. So here I kind of reviewed this table mostly to really look at what potential is for Solventum. So today the wearable ultrasound US market is at 2 billion, projected to be at 6.7 billion 10 years. And today, cardiac monitoring takes about 35% of that market share. It's kind of hard to get numbers on other things, but that was kind of like that seems to be by far the highest market and where there's the most interest in products. So Flowsonics is an example of a market that's already used and it has, I think it's between 15 and 25 million in revenue. So essentially that's been identified as the most promising market today for wearable ultrasound. And then just a list of the other markets. Some of them are really large, but there's potentially very little room for wearable ultrasound. So it's hard to tell. I try to find numbers for it, but it's kind of hard to tell what room there is for ultrasound patches. Some of those, and then essentially, so that's most of the competition. So it's a lot of other labs, and then a few companies, two at the bottom, and two companies making products on the market. So MIT lab has 2 active patents and essentially hold most of the IP in the domain. And then the other 2 labs don't have their own coupler. So I tried reaching out to some of those folks. I didn't hear back. But the idea for Solventum to essentially partner with some of those essentially promising potential companies and provide a coupler for the ones that haven't developed it, like Stanford. They use an off-the-shelf coupler. Yeah, and then Pulsonics and Zetros are two companies that have devices on the market. Pulsonics is cardiac Doppler for medical applications, and Zetros is consumer products for musculoskeletal pain and recovery. Yeah. So that's just a quick summary to show that the potential is real for Solventum to get into this market. One of the, so I think it was the UPR student has essentially demonstrated a very high performing multi-day coupler. Yeah, I'm not sure what Solventum stand with respect to that, but that's essentially the benchmark today. Yeah, and then just showing interest in different market segments between, so yeah, DARPA is also investing in ultrasound neuromodulation, which I don't think I saw anything else in that field, but just trying to show that there's an interest across several market segments. And yeah, a lot of those are like at pretty early stage besides the cardiac monitoring, essentially. Yeah, so kind of echoing what I said earlier about Solventum's baggage of having a lot of data about the material, and they would be able to essentially bring it to market much faster than a lot of other folks and at scale. And then yeah, so for the business model, so it's a little different than a lot of the other wearable we've seen here. It's pretty much just business to business, so partnering with OEMs or hospitals. But the idea is essentially directly reach out to suppliers, to OEMs, and partner with them to be like an exclusive provider for the complete, well, to be part of one piece of the complete product that they get certified by the OEM, and then sell per unit couplers. Yeah, and then just put some numbers for the cost, but just yeah, to invest some initial costs for setting up manufacturing, and then some for the regulatory certification. Risk. So again, that's a lot of what I showed last time. Essentially, the highest risk is not having the freedom to operate because of the MIT patents, and that is to be resolved by Solventum and compare their technology to what's been patented by MIT. That might be the largest one, and then make sure that they can find OEMs and reach out to the OEMs that have a product but not a coupler yet, and try to find a solution with them to develop that together. And then also I don't think I heard or have seen the data on the performance of their coupler. So just make sure that they have something competitive with the UTR to have the other, essentially at the benchmark at the moment. Yeah, a few other ones that I mentioned at the midterm already. So some of them for going the consumer path. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, just a few updates essentially on the market segments, and yeah, trying to find a path for Solventum to yeah, to market.
All right, thank you. Tony, any comments?
Yeah, I guess the first comment I have is I just really want to commend Florian and also Northwestern too. I know that there was definitely some challenges, you know, as we had some team members leave too. But Florian, I just wanted to commend you in terms of the professionalism that you displayed in the face of adversity. I think you confronted the problem head on, saying, "Hey, this is going to be a challenge. This is what I'm doing." But I really appreciated, the planful thought of how you wanted to tackle the problem, even though you're down resources. And I think that speaks volumes to Northwestern and the type of folks that you're churning out there too. So commend you, commend the university to do that as well. The timing of this is good because we're actually going into some strat planning as well, looking into some new spaces. I've recently joined our upstream team too, so we're looking at new spaces as well. I guess as you go through this and you look at the different market segments, there's definitely different monitoring and optical interrogation as part of it, and then also therapeutics as well. So through your discovery, as you're looking at these segments, did you note or did you identify any different needs, whether the acoustic coupling was related to monitoring or if it was related to therapeutics? Were there different needs that were expressed?
I'm not sure. I mean, so yeah, I'm not sure because I think a lot of that is driven by I guess the OEM, and a lot of them. I mean, in many fields there's not already any yet for wearable ultrasound. So I think it would be based on what's being developed, what products are being developed, and so I guess I'm not sure that I have identified several or like different requirements for different market segments. I guess if that was the question.
Yeah, and then I think, it's interesting to me too, as we start to see the miniaturization of some of these technologies too, and seeing some of the investments from DARPA as well too. I'm interested in learning more about, not just the monitoring and therapeutics, but if ultrasound is used as a potential trigger for future therapies as well too. I think that could be an interesting space. Overall, these segments look fairly good. The one thing I'm really excited about is now that Solventum is spun away from 3M, not only do we still retain our material science expertise, we're also looking into devices as well. So in this space could be interesting in terms of just how it complements other products in our portfolio. The last question I have for you is although you've got the market sizing here by segment in the US, were there other pockets across the globe where we started to see portable ultrasound starting to take hold in the EU, developed Asia? Any insights there?
Yeah, I think I had some company in Germany. I think I saw a few in Europe. I could put them back in. I didn't find that much, so I just dropped the ones in Europe. I think I had some company in Europe, yeah, that I don't remember the name of it, but I could add those back and send that presentation to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Florian.
Yeah, no, it's a good job, given the circumstances. And the Solventum team, I appreciate you guys willing to be clients throughout the quarter and all the feedback you've provided, during that time. Very, very grateful, much appreciated. This wearable ultrasound device segment of 2 billion and the wearable ultrasound patches, what is that exactly? Because the competitive landscape would indicate that there are only 2 startups and they're not selling anything.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the
yeah.
So wearable ultrasound devices, it includes handheld devices as well.
Oh, yeah. So not really.
And patches. Essentially, patches is more what like continuous monitoring. And yeah, I found some report that had this number, but then you look at the actual companies that are making money, and there's a bit of a mismatch there. So
yeah, so maybe it's more portable ultrasound devices or something. Is that 2 billion? Is that maybe the way to read it?
Yeah, for portable, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I would add in there too, I think part of when we look at wearable patches, and you're finding out about this, Florian, too, but when people are looking at vein discovery and they're trying to start IV sites, ultrasound is often used in that regard too. And in some cases, there are patches and dressings that would probably be encompassed in some of this market research. It's another area that, it might fit well within Solventum due to that reason as well.
All right, last question for me.
I think a lot of these kind of wearable ultrasound devices, a lot of them are thought of as small, continuously wearable, wireless, conceived of in a lot of cases. But I'm curious, is there, especially if you have these kind of acoustic coupling patches, right? You start replacing the gel with a patch. Do you open up opportunities that are where you don't necessarily need a super tiny, continuously wearable wireless, but more of even just bedside continuous ultrasound, whether it's say during a surgery procedure or during some inpatient ICU procedure? You come across anything like that?
So I didn't really look into that because I think the main target that I think Solventum was after was the wearable continuous measuring. So I didn't really look into the that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
You're using it now to monitor, or at least to look at liver problems, right? Ultrasound. I think it was on your list, right?
But I think the
organ imaging, the first one.
Yeah.
Is that because you didn't call it liver, but it says cardiac and carotid? So.
Oh no. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Florian, I do want to thank you for hanging in there. I know it was a tough quarter. I want to also say you did a great job given the circumstance. We'll give you one round of applause here. Thank you. Yeah. I do want to remind everybody to make sure you give your reports to your clients, and then also if you have time to schedule with your client, maybe a review of your final report to get some feedback. Otherwise, there is an assignment where you have to give feedback on your peers, on your team, and that'll also impact people's grades. So try to be both candid and honest with that. I think that's all I have to say, except thank you for the quarter. I thought it was a great quarter. John, any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you guys. It was a wonderful opportunity to work with you through the quarter, and everybody's great time.
Yeah, have a good summer. See you in the fall. Or if you're not, if I don't, congratulations on graduating. Graduating. Okay.
Yeah.
We got a handle. Okay, congratulations.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody online. Yeah. I'm gonna drop the call. Thanks, Tony.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Mark. Really good, John. Great quarter. Yep.
Really enjoy working with you.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
You guys see each other every day. Chad, it's been a slice.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Yeah. Every time I hear 3M, I think of you, and it's everywhere. 3M is everywhere, and everybody. I used to think Motorola's were.
Yeah.
I started to think 3M.
Hey, well, you go to the Twin Cities, you definitely have to go.
Well, we used to study, Motorola would study in earnest some of the innovations and processes coming out of 3M. You were a template for us, and I think we later became a template for others.
Yeah.
It's all that stage history.
That's a great place to be.
Yeah.
So
It's a great place to be for us.
yeah. What? Yeah, no, yeah.
Are you going to Walter maybe then? Do you think you so we kind of study together.
See you then.
Yeah, I'll be around. Yeah, I start. Yeah, but yeah, then I got able to get the.
Okay. Yeah, that works.
Okay.
So Hayes is thinking we should have perhaps more classes like this and a set of metric cap just for technical stuff. Students actually do the pitches, and if they succeed, they have a chance to become part of the team.
Yeah, that would be cool,
right?
Yeah.
But I think if you invite just the John Rogers, then a whole bunch of others.
Well, I mean, I guess, well, maybe these companies are even, I guess they're on the stage by that point, but Lisa Dar and whatnot. I mean, incubation. I mean, I guess by the time a company gets
come out of the QLab.
Yeah. Well, but by the time stuff gets to QLab, It's baked, right?
It is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, we started.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we enjoyed it.
Yeah, I just want to express how excited I'm going through.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely here. Johnny was
Yeah, I'm graduating in August. So I just want to see if there's anything like I can do. Either like just one or something. I got like a but in New York. And it was asking me to go like this March. So and then I couldn't go.
Right.
So I ended up like doing a side project.
I mean, this class helped you get the job?
I think it's I'm more like the art student for a friend. So it's not like I'm not any like yeah, but I wanted to. If it's it's trouble, I want to do it, but also I thought that you like technology, especially with the smart textile. That's why I like and I mean like everything we use to be really exciting is really like technology everything's like it's really I think it's like a different level. It's challenging.
Well, if somebody comes up in the private, I'll be providing something.
Yeah, I love to do it. It's not very much more like a actionable, like down to the market. I can just interview, start to reach out to managers. Yeah, but I do professor. This I will be working with a startup who is a student who started a Hello like website. So I just do like startup marketing for them for the summer. But
I'll keep eyes on.
Yeah, I love to.
Have the price, you know, right? Yeah. There's something there.
Yeah.
So, we have to create all that.
Yeah, I just want to say everything about it.
Good, okay. Thank you, take care, I gotta run.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the gift.
Thank you for this.
Thanks, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.